Welcome to the Am I Hunting podcast. On this episode, I will break down the process of arrow tuning. All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the Am I Hunting podcast. So what is arrow tuning, and why do you need to do it? So arrow tuning essentially is testing different components with your arrow to try to get it to shoot the best out of your bow setup. Ultimately, to get it to shoot more accurately and more efficiently. Now, certainly, is it necessary to arrow tune? No. You can most certainly go to any bow shop or outdoor store, grab whatever arrows are on the shelf, get them cut to your length, and go hunting with them. But if you want to get the best arrow flight out of your bow, these are some steps that you want to take or might want to consider taking. Basically the way I look at it is, there's so many variables involved in executing a good shot with a bow. There's pretty much, I guess, really two main camps that I really look at. There's the mechanical aspect to it and the human aspect. Now, the human aspect you can adjust to and utilize, basically practice and become more efficient or become a better archer, essentially. But there's always going to be a little bit of variance. There's going to be a little bit of human error or variance involved with your shot process. We're not a machine. We can't always execute a perfect shot every single time. So there'll be some inaccuracies when you shoot because of that. And then with the mechanical aspect of it, then those are the things that be much more consistent, and you can control those variables more. So basically it's how well your bow shoots. So if you have shot it mechanically through like a hooter shooter or something like that, how good can the bow shoot, eliminating that human element. And that's what arrow tuning helps to nail down a little bit, to make sure that bow on the mechanical side is shooting the best it can. But before we really get into the process of, or at least a process that I use, arrow tuning, I do want to highlight a pretty big event that's coming up here next month. It's the Total Archery Challenge. So these are pretty big and pretty well promoted 3D archery shoots. They have them across the country, quite a bit out west, but then they do have some events, further here in the Midwest and East. So, and they're actually bringing one again this year to Michigan. It will be June 10th through the 12th, and it's at Crystal Mountain Resort in Thompsonville, here in Michigan. So I like the fact that it's in Thompsonville. It's basically kind of my old, area where I grew up, and I actually don't live that far away from it, so I won't even have to worry about doing any, getting a hotel or staying there at the resort. I can always drive home after the shoot. So I am most definitely going to be there. So if you're interested or in the area, I certainly encourage you to come by, bring your bow, or even you can just come and observe and just enjoy the activities there. If you haven't done a 3D shoot like this before, they're an absolute blast. It's not really so much a competition. I'm sure there will be some prizes and stuff like that, and some different challenges that they'll have where you can potentially win stuff. But it's really just an opportunity to go out, bring some friends along or meet new people out there, shoot your bows, and challenge yourself a little bit. And then another thing I want to highlight here is Northern Whitetail Habitat Solutions. If you remember that name, I had Derek on, who's the owner. He does habitat improvement consultant. Well, he's actually doing a Michigan whitetail hunt giveaway. So basically what he's offering is a 3-day hunt with his team. And to be able to enter for that hunt, follow them on Facebook at Northern Whitetail Habitat. Follow them on Instagram and share what your favorite hunting memory is. All right, and then next, we're going to take a jump over to the Conservation News Desk. All right, so the first story I have here is about avian influenza, or commonly called bird flu. So bird flu was found in 3 red foxes here in the state. So these red foxes were kits or baby foxes, and when they were first found, they were found to have neurologic signs of the virus. So they were observed basically going in circles. They were having tremors, and they were seizuring. So upon intake or once they brought those to a rehabilitation center, 2 of them died within the first hour, and the 3rd died shortly after. So bird flu, as it sounds, affects all sorts of different birds, both wild and domestic, and is highly contagious throughout the bird species. So both waterfowl, domestic birds, and wild birds alike. And actually in Michigan for the year so far, there's been 69 confirmed cases, with the outbreak continuing to spread throughout North America. So a lot of biologists, a lot of scientists are keeping an eye on it, noticing an increase in the amount of cases throughout the country. Now, certainly, the case with these foxes is not the first time that they have heard of foxes becoming infected with this virus. Now, for the foxes, from this story, it's suspected that they had eaten some infected birds and became infected that way. So with this finding, the DNR is asking that if anyone observes what appears to be unusual or unexpected deaths among wild birds or neurologically abnormal or dead foxes, to report the information to the DNR Wildlife Disease Laboratory, to a local DNR field office, or the DNR Eyes in the Field app. So they are highly encouraging you to report any of those findings so they can follow up with it and track if there's any more cases of, increased cases of birds being infected or affecting other animals. So, and the DNR always encourages that the public to continue sharing such wildlife observations. So even if the DNR is unable to actually come out and respond to the call, they do encourage that you give them a call, file a report. Basically you help become their eyes and ears out in the field. They have only so many employees, so many biologists available, so many field staff. So anything that us out enjoying the outdoors men and women within the state and across the country even, we can help report lots of different things when it comes to sightings or anything that the DNR, may not have observed on their own without our help. Next, for here in Michigan, the 2022 fur harvester licenses are now available. So they're available now from May 1st through April 30th of 2023. Now, if you're also looking to get a bobcat, otter, fisher, or martin tag, those are also available, but you do have to purchase those separately, and those are now available as well. So that's it for the update from the Conservation News Desk. So let's get into the subject matter at hand. All right, so yeah, we're talking arrow tuning. Again, as I kind of explained in the intro a little bit earlier, this is a step that you don't necessarily have to take, but if you're looking to get a little bit more out of your arrows, out of your bow setup, then this is, something that you may want to take the time and effort into. It just becomes, these extra steps just help you become a little bit better archer, ultimately making it to where your bow is shooting the absolute best it can, at least within, your capabilities of being able to make adjustments to it. So before we really get into adjusting or making changes to the different components and setups of your arrow, to do this process, your bow must be in tune. So whether you know how to tune your bow yourself, or if you take it to a bow shop and have them make sure that bow is shooting within specs. So what you'll often hear is that the bow is set up at its center shot. Basically what that is that you have your bow and your arrow rest basically in line, and your bowstring, when you release the arrow, is driving in a straight line. It's not waving back and forth, basically out of tune, cause a movement of that bowstring, which would cause movement of your arrow as it releases from the bow. So again, if you know how to do it yourself, great. If not, take it to your bow shop, have them get your bow in tune and make sure it's all tuned up, ready to go for you. So there are several steps involved in this process, and there's some additional supplies that you'll want to get maybe ahead of time before you start this process. That way you're not getting held up waiting on different components that you're going to be potentially changing out. And then with this process too, you don't necessarily have to do all these steps. There's really 3 main different steps parts of this process, and you can complete one of them, a couple of them, or all of them, and you will get still improvement of your arrow flight. So let's get into that process. So you have your arrow picked out, and you've purchased it. You've got it cut to the correct length. You've made sure that your spine is set correctly for your bow poundage and draw length. Now with this, the best way to do it is if you get a arrow that's a bare shaft and doesn't already have fletchings attached to it. Now, if you have arrows that are already fletched, then at this point I'm going to tell you that you're going to want to strip those vanes off or strip that fletching off, because you want to do this first step with an arrow shaft that doesn't have any fletchings on it. Basically, again, like I discussed, in selecting the right arrow, those fletchings are designed to help control that arrow flight and adjust it. We basically want to break it down to trying to get just the arrow flight without any additional influence, at least at this point. So you've got your bare shaft arrow. Now you'll have your nock in place and your inserts. Now with your inserts, you can do a couple different things. You can just go ahead and install your standard inserts if that's what you purchase, or if you've gone with an aftermarket. Now, you might go with an aftermarket if you're looking at increasing your FOC or front of center, or if you're looking for additional arrow weight. Typically, those aftermarkets are going to be a heavier metal, so a standard insert is going to be aluminum. Some of these aftermarket ones or additional ones that you can purchase will either be brass, steel, whatnot, so heavier, denser metal to increase basically the weight and strength of that insert. So you have your insert installed. One thing you'll want to have as part of the supplies that you'll want to have is some type of field point test kit. Now what this test kit is essentially a pack of different weighted points. So typically they run from starting at 100 grains up to 300 or 400, somewhere in there, and they'll have a variation of different sizes in between. So again, you can purchase those through a couple different companies. One that I might recommend is going with Vantage Point Archery. With that company, again, they make an array of fixed blade broadheads, and they also have a kit that has those different sizes available. So what you'll do then is screw in one of each of those different weighted points into each of your arrows. Now, the next part of the setup will be is that you want to get your target set up, and you want it essentially set up close to eye level. You want to be shooting level at your target, because basically what we're doing is checking to see how the arrow impacts that target. So you want to set it up to where you're basically shooting straight across, or straight at your target, not pointed down or not pointing up at it. Now, this process can also be done shooting through paper. Now, so essentially shooting through paper is you have a target behind and you have a piece of paper in front of the target, and you shoot through the paper, and basically you're looking at, is that arrow flying straight through the paper, basically creating a bullet hole or a single little dot hole, or is it tearing because the arrow is flying through that paper, kind of crooked or sideways or angled one way or the other, where it creates a tear more than just like a little bullet hole. So either or, you can do either one. Now again, most people aren't going to be set up to be able to shoot through paper, or they may not have the time or want to go to the bow shop to try to do it that way. So if you have your own standard target, you can do that as well. So what you're going to do is, now that you've got your target set up or your paper set up, you want to stand somewhere between 7 to 10 yards away from it. And basically, you're just going to shoot each of those arrows into the target. Now, what you're looking for is, as you go up to that target, you'll see that some of the arrows are more square with the target than others. So I guess one thing I forgot to mention is that you do want to stand essentially, straight in front of the target and have the target facing straight at you. So what you're looking at is how are those arrows impacting that target. And basically, you're going to look at which weighted tip gave you the arrow that hit the target the straightest or didn't have any variation on, or it's like not angled or anything like that, either up or down or side to side. Now, you may even want to do it a couple times through to really get a good feel of it. And again, the one thing that's very important is that with each of these arrows, you need to make sure you execute a good shot. So if you pulled a shot, or if you know that you didn't make a good shot, at least execution wise, then you're going to want to pull that arrow, give it another shot. So you want to make sure that you feel confident that you've made a good shot. That way you're just looking at the arrow performance and trying to eliminate as much of that human error as possible. So one thing that you may notice is that you may have multiple, point weights that all seem to be performing about the same. So that of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. That gives you some options of different point weights that you can use. So that gives you another option, especially when it comes to picking a broadhead. So you know that, your bow, likes to shoot the arrow, basically with this type of, point weight, and it gives you some options. So now that you've pinpointed the point weight that performed best, or even if it did have a group of points that all seem to perform really well, then you get to pick on which one you want to go with. At that point, pick whichever weight you want to go with to the next step. Install that point into all your arrows, and this next part of the process is called nock tuning. So again, if you listen back to the selecting the arrows episode, I talked about how, especially with the carbon arrows, that you'll have some inconsistencies in that carbon throughout the arrow. Now this is where that matters. So your bow will have essentially, so there'll be a position of that nock based on where that inconsistency is of that arrow that's going to fly out of your bow your best, or the best. So what you're going to do is you're going to either mark or have a reference point the position of your nock in regards to your arrow. So you can either mark your nock, the top part of the nock, and then also make a mark on your arrow, or use a reference point on some of the decals or markings on the arrow itself as your reference point. What you're going to do is take a single arrow. You're going to shoot that arrow into your target again, or again, you can shoot it through paper. And you're going to observe and make note of how that arrow landed. So again, you're probably going to notice that it's still going to have a lean one way or the other, or tilt up or tilt down. It may not be shooting perfectly straight. So you're going to make note of it. So you either take a picture of it or just make a mental note of how that arrow, either went through the paper or landed in your target. Then what you're going to do is take that nock and turn it 90 degrees. Now again, you can pick whichever direction you want to turn it, but turn it 90 degrees. Turn that mark on your nock up, facing up again. Nock your arrow, take another shot. Again, you're going to take a look at it, either through the paper or on your target, and you're going to make note again of how that arrow flight was. Now, it may look worse than the first shot, or it may appear better, or at least hit the target straighter, or go through the paper better. And you're going to do this all the way around the arrow. Or what you're looking for is where that nock positioned as it gets spun around that arrow ended up basically shooting the best, or giving you the straightest arrow flight. And then once you've determined that location, that your arrow flight is the best, again, you're going to keep that mark on the top of that nock, and also mark again on your arrow where that ideal nock position is, so you don't lose track of where that spot is. Now you're going to want to do this process or this part of the nock tuning with every single arrow that you're going to shoot. And you'll notice that it's going to be a little different on many of those arrows. So again, this is kind of time consuming, But to get the best arrow flight, this is just one more step that you can take to ensure that. And then the next part is picking a vane configuration. So now we're at the point where we can glue back on some fletchings or vanes. And what we're going to do then is kind of pick between several different options and again, what made the arrow fly the best. Now at this point, I do recommend that you do this step using your broadheads. Now again, you're gonna tear up your target, especially depending on how many shots you end up taking doing this. But if you do it with your field points and then you go to try and then you set up, with the fletching configuration that worked best shooting a field point, and then all of a sudden you screw on a broadhead, that may fly completely different, or it may not fly as it did using a field point. So it just saves you a little bit of work. I did this a couple years back where I found a configuration that worked really good using field points, screwed my broadheads on just to see how it worked, and it didn't. Basically I was having a nice tight group with my field points. As soon as I screwed my broadheads on, then my shot group opened way up. It was very inconsistent. So then I ended up changing up that configuration, and then I was able to find a configuration that worked best for my choice of broadhead. So again, for this process, if you have your own fletching jig, you can do it yourself, or you're going to have to take a few arrows to the bow shop and have them do this for you. Now what you're going to do is basically do 2 to 3 arrows in each different combination. So you may have 2 to 3 arrows with a 3 vane option. You may have a few arrows 2 to 3 with a 4 fletch or 4 vanes on it. You may go with a low profile or a very short vane, or you may even use a bigger vane like the blazer vanes that are again quite common or quite popular. You can kind of pick whatever combination you want to test with, and you could go, you can have 3 different arrow or fletching configurations, or you could go all the way up to have 7, 8, 9, 10, however creative you want to get with it. And then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to take your target and you're going to try shooting each of those configurations with your broadhead attached. And a couple of things that you're going to be trying to observe. You're going to observe the arrow flight. So, again, depending on the distance that you're shooting at, you'll be able to see that more clearly. So longer distances, you'll be able to see that arrow flight, give a little bit more time to be able to see how that arrow's flying through the air. Now you may notice right away that there might be some where the arrow's kicking and flopping all over the place, flying through the air, and that may be an indication that that's not a good combination. So I guess I need to pause here because I did forget to specify one additional thing to make sure that you're being accurate with this. You're going to want to make sure that you pick a time that is not real windy for any of these processes. That cross breeze or a strong breeze or something like that could make it a little bit more difficult to make sure you're being consistent in figuring out all these steps and all these correct components. So that's one caveat I forgot to really talk about in the beginning, but that is one thing that is key. And then getting back to what you're observing with that arrow, so you're looking at the arrow flight. Does it seem to be flying straight and not be wobbling through the air? And then also you're taking a look at your groups. So are your arrows grouped together? So if you have like vanes, grouping in a very tight spot, you'll find that probably some other ones are going to be much wider or spread out more. And then another thing that you take a look at too is your point of impact versus your point of aim. So if you're aiming for the center of the target and all those arrows are landing low and to the right or high and to the left or whatever, just make note of that too. But really the more important thing is the arrow flight and the grouping size. So you're going to do this, and again, depending on how long it takes, you might have to do several volleys of going through those to really determine which one's kind of flying the best. Pick from different distances as well. Do a few shots or do a volley of all those arrows up close. Go back 10, 20 yards, do it again, and see if you notice much difference. Again, as you back up, those variances are going to be shown exponentially as well. So maybe backing up as long as you're comfortable with that further distances. Shoot at that farther distance and you'll be able to see those variances highlighted a little bit more. And again, you're going to do that until you really are able to pinpoint a vane configuration that your arrows are flying the best and have the best grouping or the smallest spacing between any of those arrows. And at that point, you've picked basically the configuration that really works best for your arrow. Now there are some other things, if you're still not quite on point, then you can always tinker and test a little bit more if you wanted to. But ultimately, this is really the process that I go through. So going through it, you've got the best point weight that your arrow flies the best with. You've adjusted the nock position to also increase arrow efficiency by allowing it to fly a little bit straighter yet. And then you pick the vane configuration that helps control those broadheads and helps steer them the best. And that's pretty much it for this process. So you basically take the best combination of all those steps, and now you can build your arrows all with that same setup. And again, if you ended up with multiple point weights, then you do have some flexibility to be able to adjust the different types of broadheads again. Now again, if you are changing the size or shape of the broadhead, then you may want to double check your vanes configurations to make sure they're flying right. I ended up having that happen where just as recently, or just this year really, I've changed out to a new broadhead. It's a very big, heavy 3-blade broadhead, and I had previously used smaller 2-blade or a smaller 3-blade broadhead, and I had a much smaller, low-profile vane that worked really well for them. I tried shooting this larger broadhead with it, and it was very inconsistent. That broadhead wasn't flying as good due to those vanes not being big enough or having enough drag to help control that front end of that broadhead with that larger profile it had. So this year I've had to change out my vane configuration to one that's a little bit bigger, has a little bit more drag to help control that larger broadhead. Now certainly if I wanted to, I could go back down to a smaller broadhead and go back down to, again, smaller vanes, not needing as much of basically that rudder to help control it. But again, so once you've got your setup, do make sure that you take note of those specs for that arrow and what your bow really like to shoot. Because if you make any changes going forward, so if you change to a different arrow, different broadhead, if you want to change your vanes, then you have basically a baseline of kind of what you started out with, what shot well, and then if you make any changes, you can always reference back to it to see if it was an improvement or if you need to make any additional changes. But that's it, essentially. So, it's up to you if you want to take those extra steps and go through and take forth the effort to, fine-tune your arrows to help. Again, I'm a firm believer that doing these steps will help make you a better archer in regards to helping keep those group sizes smaller by giving yourself more of a mechanical advantage. Because of course there's only so much we can do on the human element side, so by eliminating some additional variables to help narrow that margin of error, all the better. But yeah, so that's it for this episode. Hope you got something out of it, and as always, get out there, be safe, and have fun.